Hello, everyone, and welcome to Speak Your Truth podcast. I'm Kristen Bomas, and we are on a conscious journey to enlightenment. Today, we're going to talk about one of my signature statements. We judge only in the way we are fearful of being judged. Let me say that again. We judge only in the way we are fearful of being judged. And so, in brief, that means that where we have fears around particular challenges, then judgments that are in those particular arenas are going to affect us. So how often do you take a judgment personally, right? When you take it personally, it hurts, it can demean, it can falter your self-esteem and self-confidence. And how do we take it personally? That's another podcast. But it does elicit a challenge that has yet to be healed within us. And then that judgment reaffirms old beliefs, old challenges. So judgments can be very difficult. So let me give you a little bit of an example before we get started. We're going to talk a little bit about where this idea of my sentence came from. We're going to talk a little bit about how judgment affects us in life. And then we're going to talk about lingering effects of judgment and how it plays out. But let's look at the sentence. We judge only in the way we're fearful of being judged. So if I'm sitting here and I see a woman walking down the street and she's very, very, very tiny, and I say, oh my God, she is so tiny and thin. Well, I'm not judging her as tiny and thin because I think somebody's going to judge me as tiny and thin. That's not it. But I must then also have a fear of being judged because of my physical appearance, and therefore I am noticing her physical appearance. So hopefully that example helps make sense of that. That it doesn't always have a literal connotation, but it always goes from challenge to challenge. So if you're judging a body type, it's because you've got some fear around judgment of body type. And so you're going to be more conscious of that, and so on and so forth. So as we look at this saying or quote, I want it to be something that kind of resonates within, because it's going to help you discern what's you and what's someone else. Judgment is the basis of most of our suffering. It's a basis of most of our attachment. So very often people who are fearful of the judgments will stay attached to someone in hopes of being loved. So how do people stay in relationships when somebody's being kind of cruel or mean with their words and their judgments, and then call it a loving relationship? Because they're hoping to master that opinion. They want to be good enough to not be judged in that way, to not be criticized. So I will actually be doing a Facebook Live on that very question, how do people allow others to be mean or cruel or harshly judging in the name of being loved? And it's an interesting question, and one that occurs more than I think most of us want to believe. So judgment does, and you can see in that, create a lot of suffering, and it does create the attachment. Judgment can be the part of suffering where we feel not good enough. It can be what causes the suffering of betrayals. Not only is that an absence of loyalty, but if we're betrayed, were we betrayed because we weren't good enough to not be betrayed? Maybe it all goes back to not being good enough. The judgments then take us to a place of loneliness if we believe in it. We just, again, don't think we're good enough to be loved. And how does that play in? Not accepted. It all comes back, right? So judgment can be at the core of a good portion of our suffering, if not all of it. The attachment that judgment can create is also very debilitating in this lifetime, because attachment exists out of fear of loss. So if somebody judges you and says nobody's going to love you like I love you, you're just not good enough for that, again, that judgment breaks down you feeling good about yourself, and in that you think you must stay attached to this one in order to not lose the very love that you really don't have in the first place. So it creates a very interesting confound. So why do we look at the sentence? We are judged only in the way we judge only in the way we're fearful of being judged. Because if that person is judging you, and you can sit back and be the observer and see that that person is judging you out of their own fear, it gives you a little bit of breathing room, if not a lot of understanding. At the beginning, it'll give you breathing room. It's like, okay, what did they just say? And is that me or is that them? And you really want to see it's coming from them. So something in them is noticing that in you out of a fear that exists in them or a challenge that is yet to be healed. And so it gives you in that breathing room an opportunity to have a little bit more objectivity in your observing of the other person. It doesn't mean that the judgments need to be just completely discarded. Sometimes if I get a criticism about something I've done, I know it's a match or not a match, but if I don't know, I think first, could this have something to do with me? If not, then I know it's coming from the other person. And that's not always a judgment, but it's usually some sort of a criticism. And I guess that's a judgment. So when we look at the attachment and the way we want to then back away from that attachment, gain some distance so we can be the observer, so that we can have some objectivity, then we use the sentence to give us the opportunity to say, is that you? And to take that time. As we start to heal our own wounds, the judgment disappears. As the judgment disappears within us, it becomes much more crystal clear why the judgment is coming from the other and how the judgment is coming from the other, and that the judgment is coming from the other. So we don't take it as personally. As we look at mastery, we're mastering our own challenges, and of course if we're judging out of our own challenges, as we start to master those challenges, the judgments fall out of the picture. And of course, as our judgments fall out of the picture, we stop taking it personally when others throw judgments around. Number one, because we start to be more the observer without any ego attached to that as we go forward, but also because we don't have the same challenges available to take it personally. So there's a lot that goes into starting to use that sentence to break through some of the pieces of mastery with the challenges in your own life. So how did I kind of get to a place where this quote became so useful in my life and the lives of my clients? People talk about projection. Oh, that's his projection. Oh, he projected that onto me. Okay, that's vague in one way, right? So he projected that onto me. What do we do with that? Like, okay, so what? I still feel like shit. So like, what does that mean? Like, how do we really get to a place of understanding what that projection means for us? Well, most people don't, is the quick answer to that, because it's a one-way street and life isn't a one-way street, life is a circle. So if we know that we're being judged like that, and that judgment is being projected onto us because that person across from us is dealing with a challenge in that exact area, now we've got some stuff that we can work with. We've got some ways to tease it apart from taking it personally, and ways to tease it apart so we can ask questions of the person across from us. Are you concerned about the way people judge your appearance? Are you concerned about the way people judge your accent, your beliefs, your career, your choices? Whatever you're being judged on, you can actually open up some questions for the person judging you that may redirect the entire dynamic of the conversation or the relationship. But that's another podcast. So again, I want you to think about this. We judge only in the way we're fearful of being judged. So what are the fears that lead to the judgments in your own life? The more you explore that, the more you will understand how to explore the other. So start with your own judgments. Judgments you have of others, judgments you have of systems, of political views, of yourself, all of that stuff. Where are your judgments, and what do they tell you about the challenges in your own life? And as you ask yourself that question gently, like, okay, why am I feeling, like that's an ugly painting? Why am I judging it as ugly? Why can't I find the beauty in the ugliness? Right? So what is that about? Is there something I'm afraid of with ugly? What does that mean? Am I afraid that my creativity would be judged as ugly? Am I afraid what? What's the challenge within? Don't be afraid to ask. Because once you are not afraid to ask where your judgments are coming from, you won't be afraid to ask where that other person's judgments are coming from, and thereby not taking them personally. So again, remember, yes, while it is a projection, it's not a one-way street. It is a circle built upon the fear of the one judging. Remember that it is in the judgment that we create suffering for ourselves and others, and attachment within ourselves and others. Keep the sentence in your back pocket and learn to let it open your life and remind you to be the observer of what fears and challenges in that other person are causing them to be so judgmental. A small bit of advice. Don't let those questions about their judgments become a reason to stay in a relationship with someone who is strongly judgmental. If the judgments are hurting over and over and over again, you may be in an abusive relationship, and that's not love-based. Love is never behind judgment. It's never in front of judgment. Love does not exist where there is judgment. So where there is judgment in your life, there is fear. So ask yourself, for yourself, how you would like to experience your life, and start to move away from those judgments by breaking down the challenges that create them. I thank you for joining me today on this podcast. We'll be doing another podcast in the future to look at the same signature statement, but how it can be used to to open it up a little bit in its meaning, so it can be used in all of your relationships with self and other. It can have some pretty powerful meanings for all of you to use as a small tool with multiple uses. So I thank you again for joining me on this podcast. Speak your truth, and may all of us enjoy our conscious journey to enlightenment.